one more table, and I want to show you how you do grouping, right, for one of the questions. So some of the key things we'll pick up on, like audience centricity, how you kind of connect to audience, who is going to consume your message, and go through some storytelling techniques, and how do you overcome the challenges, right? So there's some tips that you can take, but when you present more, only then you overcome the challenge, right? It comes with practice. I can tell you thousands of things. If you don't try it, you're not going to kind of find out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, right? Okay. But one of the key things I always tell my students when they present, don't read from notes all the time. And in these days, I saw a new trend. They'll put your notes on phone and they'll just scroll and read, scroll and no, don't do that, right? So notes are just for the cues. You shouldn't be reading entirely from your notes, right? Okay. So here's some learning outcomes. So design presentation tailored to need and expectations of the different audience, right? So I already saw some of the presentations like you developed in Canva, so that's excellent. But you can always bring in those design concepts, like use muted colors, highlight certain points, add circles, some numbers, and perhaps some descriptions on your presentation based on what narrative you want to build, right? Then apply advanced storytelling techniques to captive and to pursue the listeners, right? At the end of the day, whatever things you're presenting is not about what happened. It should lead to why happened and how you can resolve those issues, right? Then look into some approaches to overcome common challenges in presenting analytical findings. So yeah, I will try to sit there and perhaps you guys will present. Then we'll kind of do some feedback, right? A peer evaluation. And it's great to see you already using Canva. So now I need to start doing that, right? So, but yeah, we'll stick here to Canva or PowerPoint, whatever works well, okay? So this was the case we were working yesterday, right? So we went through most of these activities, and the only one bit is remaining, which is showing the growth, right? Year-to-year growth from 2010 to 2012. So there are different ways to do it. You can start, you can do this then directly in the visualization tab. For that, you can use what you call calculator measures, and for that you need to use M language, right? So as none of you know about M language, so we're going to go back to the tables. We're going to add one more table, and we try it using grouping. So let's go to Power BI. So please open same file that you have yesterday. So here is my file from yesterday, right? So we had 4 tables, right? Reference date, store, holiday reference, and sales, right? So let's create a reference to Walmart sales. So if you right click, create a reference query, and you got a new table, right? And the question is, I want to show year-on-year growth for different stores. So which means I need to look into yearly data. Weekly data isn't useful anymore, right? I want to consolidate data or group by years, right? And my point of interest is store number, sales date, and weekly sales. So we're going to drop rest of the columns. We don't need those, right? So let's pick up these columns and remove other. And now we want to group, right? So usually when we group it, we summarize our KPIs. In this case, weekly sales is a KPI, right? But before you go ahead and do that, you need to convert this to some common format. If you look carefully, this is like February, right? We have 4 dates here, then some dates in March. So my point of interest is year. So let's extract year information from here, right? Anybody knows how you do that? And add column. Column by, yeah, you can do that. You can split all the columns. There was one more function for date. There was something called extract, right? So I think it should be under transform. If you go to date, you want to extract year. right? But there's nothing wrong. You can split it. That's okay too, right? But in this case, we are getting all the information in one step, right? Okay. So select the column, date column, go to transform, and then in the data option, we extract year, right? You guys got it? Okay. Then now we want to do grouping. So when you do grouping, please put your columns in the order you want to group, right? So in this case, I want to have store number, then year consolidated based on the weekly sales, right? So can you locate grouping somewhere? So in this case, here we go, group by. So if you go to home tab, under home you have option for transform and you have group by. So I'm going to select store and sales and we're going to do group by. Okay, what happened? Did it come up for you guys?
Yes,
Where did it go for me? Okay. Oh, here we go. And instead of saying count, I'm going to call it total yearly sales. And then you select the operation. So instead of count, we're going to do sum, right? We want to do the aggregation based on weekly sales. Okay, so let's press OK. Now you can see we have sales for store 1 for 2010, 11, 12, store 2, 10, 11, 12, and so on. So your sales are grouped based on those two dimensions, right? So it's kind of opposite of slicing and dicing, right? So we're just putting it together, right? Everybody got it? Okay, so I want to rename this query. I'm going to call it yearly sales. Okay. And next thing, we apply. Oops, where's my cursor? Okay. So once you apply, then let's display year-on-year growth for kind of top store or the store which has maximum year-on-year growth compared with store with least, right? Okay. So let's throw in a line chart and work with yearly sales data, the newly created table, and year will go into axis and sales will go into Y. Okay, what happened here? So we have store sales data total yearly. And if I put store in legend, So did your visual look a bit different or same? What did we do here? So we have sales date, and if I change it to a category, and let's do apply. So that should go here, and sales date. So your visual should look like something like that, right? No? Yes? Sorry? So we have sum of total yearly sales in y-axis and sales date in x-axis. And in legend you have store, right? Because we want to segregate data store wise. But anyways, overall trend, if you look into all the lines, it's kind of downwards. Sales is actually dropping for all the stores, going from 2011 to 2012, right? So now I want to look into the store which has the highest sales across 3 years. So how would you do that? So top end, right? So we can apply basic filter. So I'm going to apply basic filter on store. So let's say top 1 based on total yearly sales, right? So this is the store which has store number 20, I believe that what you should be getting. Yeah, store number 20. Although the trend is downwards, but this is a store which has year over year highest sales in the data set, right? Same way you can find out the store which has lowest number of sales on year by year basis. good here, right? So that was all for this particular part, right? So you know how to do grouping now. So grouping is useful when you want to aggregate data based on certain dimensions, right? Okay. Right. So now let's move to the next bit, which is so this is what you guys are going to do when you present. So let's wrap up the rest of it. So there are certain bits that you need to keep in mind, right? So when it comes to telling a compelling narrative, at cost of repetition, please do not stop at what. Try to link it to why and how you can resolve the issue, right? So think it as a movie. Whenever you go and watch a movie, usually first 15-20 minutes they will set the scene, what's happening, right, why things are there, then the action starts, right, or whatever the type of movie is, right? So then you're resolving issues or something happening, but at the end you have a conclusion. Either it's a win-win situation or it's a kind of a negative outcome, but there's an outcome at the end, right? Otherwise it is incomplete. So that's why you have sequels when there's some kind of open paths, right? But in this case we're not trying to create any sequel, you're trying to address problems, right? So consider the scenario. If I'm presenting this to management and I tell them, okay, the inventory turnover ratio in Ontario is very high for 2021 compared to previous years. I can see that from graph as well. Then what? So always ask yourself, then what, when you're preparing your presentations. So you should be able to tell that story in the form of then what. So why this is important if the inventory turnover ratio is high, right? And most often you will run into a situation where perhaps you don't have a complete picture about the business. So then you go ask questions, right? And in most cases you will have missing information from stakeholders. So what can happen, like somebody gave you data, okay, can you pull some information out of that? You can go ahead and create plots, charts, but it may not fit with the business needs, right? So asking questions is very important. Ask what are the KPIs, what narrative they want out of that story, what kind of report they are looking into, right? What kind of decisions needs to be made, right? Why this data is important for the business. So then you can start thinking about what needs to be extracted from data itself, right? So be careful, right, with that. So there's a term we use, analytics value chain. Anybody thoughts? What is a value chain in general form in business world? So business folks, you may have come across this term value chain. There's something called value chain model. No? Yes? No? So value chain model divides the activities within an organization into primary and secondary activities. So your primary activities are ones which adds value to a product or service. So from a supply chain perspective, you will have inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, customer service, and sales, right? But however, these can't work on their own. You need to have people, for example, HR, or you need to have technology support, which is IT, procurement, and so on, right? But the main thing is, what are the activities which are converting a product or service into the value, right? So that customer can use it. So usually organizations will focus on value chain and try to direct their resources based on their core competency, right? So that's the whole idea to understand value chain. So same way we have analytics value chain. Anybody thoughts what would the analytics value chain? So you have inputs, right, on data. So yes, you got data as part of the value chain. So what else? Okay, what are the actions we have to do after you have data, right? So you kind of told the very first part of value chain and the last bit. So remember we talked about data, information, knowledge, wisdom, and then action. So that's the analytics value chain. So if I just go by this slide, if I tell, okay, the ITR is high for 2021 for Ontario, that's just information. Those are just facts that we kind of draw from data, like doing some averages, summation, or perhaps some other functions, right? But it doesn't complete analytics value chain unless I say, okay, the ITR is high, we are turning inventories quickly into sales because we have supply chain issues, we don't have much inventories on hand, right? So now it starts linking to that knowledge bit, why it's happening. Then perhaps I have more understanding about the business, and we know demand in 2022 is going to increase by 20%. And we may say, okay, we don't have enough supplies if I don't sort our supply chain. So that's the recommendation to the decision maker. Okay, your sales is increasing by this percentage, and the inventory turnover ratio is increasing too. We don't have enough inventories going forward. So that's going to impact our customer service levels. So now sky is the limit. Perhaps you have information on the revenue. So okay, it's going to impact revenue. We will decrease the revenue by 5%, right? So that's the analytics value chain. So now I know what are the consequences of this, and what we can do in order to sort out these things, right? Okay, so we want to see that kind of narrative with your analytics, right? Okay, does this make sense, guys? Okay. So again, I think kind of picked up on this. Why do we do analytics? Because we need to make business decisions. And the primary focus in modern organizations is to make data-driven decisions. So please remember, data-driven decisions are not based on charts or facts. Those are based on the knowledge and the wisdom you create from the analytics, right? Understanding why and how, okay? So what is product of analytics? It's a data-driven decision, right? Okay. So here we go. Here's your analytics value chain. So data, information, knowledge, decisions, and use some results or the outcomes, right? To influence the course of action that you want to take, right? Any questions on value chain? Sorry, I jumped ahead. So I was supposed to explain that bit here. So we have high inventory turnover ratio. As standalone graph, this doesn't tell anything. Well, when you start linking into the average inventories, look, Ontario, average inventory is at the lowest level. So that kind of brings us back to the discussion when we did the first dashboard in Excel. So I think one of the folks said that this is a good thing. We are turning quickly in our inventories quickly into sales, means it's a better cash flow, right? But on the other part of the story is we have the lowest inventories as well. And it is 2021. We had most of the supply chain issues due to COVID, due to lockdowns, and container shortages, port delays, you name it, right? So if the demand is increasing, we may not be able to do the better customer service, right? So business will have impact on revenue. So I want to take these back up so that we can deal with supply chain risks, right? So now it becomes a complete narrative, right? Otherwise, these are just standalone visuals. They don't tell anything, right? Other than just simply facts. Okay, so link it. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Right. So key considerations, understanding business context is important, right? So primarily when you work as analyst or with consulting firms, usually you'll get data, perhaps not the full picture from your client, right? So you need to go back and ask questions, right? You do interviews with clients to understand what the real problem is, right? So don't be shy of asking questions. And there are two main things when it comes to building a compelling narrative. You need to understand who is your audience. So you want to strike a balance between going too specific or too broad. Anybody thoughts? What will be too specific? What will be too broad? Yeah, so going into technical terms which are not relevant to the audience. So think from the analytics process perspective, right? So let's say we are presenting it to directors or the managers. I don't need to talk about the p-values greater than 0.05 and so on, right? It doesn't have any value for those decision makers, right? At the same time, you don't want to be too broad where you're not connecting all the dots with the visuals, right? You're presenting information in silos, right? So you want to go away from that. So that's from the process perspective. So what about the audience itself? Can you be very specific in terms of audience, or maybe too broad? So within an organization, you have different departments. So you're not presenting to a particular person in the department. So perhaps the analysis you did, that's applicable at the departmental level. That's applicable at the organizational level. So you need to identify those boundaries. So going back to previous example, let's say we are a retailer, right? For example, Walmart, right? So we are presenting these results to a team. So we have somebody from operations, we have somebody from procurement, and a person from the transportation, right? So when I'm presenting the results in terms of the lower inventory levels, which is going to have impact on the sales, that is going towards more of the operational folks, right? Because they need to make sure the service levels are maintained and the stores are well functioning and so on. If we suggest from here that we need to find a new supplier, because we're not going to get deliveries from a supplier in Asia or wherever that supplier is based, that's more directed towards a procurement folk, right? So we need to kind of identify those stakeholders who are listening to that story, right? If you tell we need to find a new supplier to operations team, I don't care. I don't go out and find new suppliers. This is part of the procurement process, right? So that's where you need to kind of understand who you're presenting. So you're not presenting to a specific individual, but most of the cases you're presenting to a department, to a team who's going to make certain decisions, right? That make sense? Okay. And if you're not sure, ask who is going to attend the presentation, right? Okay. So that's not bad. That's very common, right? So I often ask guest speakers to come to my classes. So usually guest speakers, they will come 15-20 minutes early, and they will even ask, okay, how your class looks like, what's the demographic, male, females, what's their background, right? Because the courses I teach, those are in business intelligence. I will have students from accounting, from finance, supply chain. They will have different backgrounds, and the whole idea is for those guest speakers to kind of relate their story when they're presenting the guest sessions, right? So there's no harm asking questions, right? Who's attending? Why not? And what is the outcome of your analysis? So understanding that what are the KPIs, how they're going to impact the decisions, right? So that brings us back to same thing. We are trying to implement more of a problem-driven analytics here, right? We're not doing data-driven analytics. Everybody remember the difference between those two? So we have two broad categories, problem-driven and data-driven. So data-driven, we don't have a specific question in mind, right? We are really working with large data sets, and we want to understand the anomalies, perhaps hidden patterns, right? But in this case, when you have a set decision, then we will have specific KPIs from different departments from your organization, which needs to be balanced out, right? Okay. And those will help you to guide the analysis and your narrative, right? And tell a story in a connected form. Okay. Any questions, folks, on this? So here are some questions that you can use as a reference. I'm not going to read through these, so these are just for your reference, right? So always ask questions related to context and background. So maybe you're given with a data set. So you can ask, okay, from where this data is coming, why we are looking into this, right? Then you can ask about specific KPIs that links to data, and what are the different goals that we want to achieve after the analysis. So that will give you the background, why we are doing the analysis, right? Okay. Then what is the success criteria? I know the goals, I know the KPIs, but is 5% sales good enough? I don't know. What's your department's goal, right? Perhaps you have a set target for next year, next quarter, right? So I want to know those, right? Otherwise, your story can be unsuccessful, right? So it may not make any difference, okay? And when we do the analysis, the outcomes may not be in favor, but that's still an outcome. So let's say we did the analysis, we looked into trends, and the organization's target is to improve the sales by 10%. But based on the prediction you made, the target is going to improve by 5%. So that's still an outcome. So that can be incorporated into decision-making process. What changes do I need to make to bring it to 10% instead of 5%, right? But if I don't know the goals, if I don't know the KPIs, I can't drive this narrative. Okay. Then you have data exploration, right? So you need to understand the assumptions about data. So anything specific you need to focus on, anything specific you need to kind of eliminate, or that should avoid in the analysis, right? So I want to tell you a story here based on my own experience. That will link to one of the things we are going to discuss later too. So I was involved in a construction project when I was postdoc in UK. So we collected data from a site about the delivery schedule, and we kind of ran that through simulation, did a bit of optimization. We came up with a optimal schedule. We gave it to the guys, they ran it, it worked fine. Then we were supposed to present the results. And in results, I didn't know that they have the planners were sitting as the people who are going to listen. So we're kind of pushing, okay, we need to do the optimization. Let's start using simulation. And those guys thought we're trying to eliminate people here. We're trying to bring in technology, right? And there was a huge pushback, all kind of nasty questions from the audience, right? So that's why it's very important to know what to avoid, how to present it. The whole focus was to make their life easier so that they can use simulation, they can do the optimization, then do the scheduling. But they thought, no, it's just going to be some computer who's just throwing some numbers out and they will just follow that schedule, right? So very important, what to avoid. Okay. How many of you ever came across a term which is called data story arc? Have you ever heard about this? No? So just a fancy term, but nothing more than we have some initial phase where you have this setting the plot, then you perhaps support your findings with the analysis. So we're starting with what and the background, then that's beginning, right? Then we are bringing why, explain all the results perhaps to the inferential stats, right? And perhaps to the why analysis. Then you're doing the recommendations. That's kind of leading to the resolution. So when you're telling a story, always follow a set pattern which has beginning, middle point, and end. And most of the times where you'll notice the end point is missing. People won't tell what to do. They won't tell the directions, right? So most of you write research papers, you have conclusion and recommendation section, right? If that's weak, doesn't matter. What have you presented in the paper, it's not going to go through, right? So the recommendations or the resolution component is very important. Now there are different flavors to these arcs. So again, some fancy terms, right? I believe these are primarily derived from the movies, right? So the underdog. So in this case, the story is linked to overcoming a challenge. So let's say the sales was below average for previous months. Then we did some marketing campaign and sales went back on track and it increased. So when you're telling that story, when you're showing the previous months, so I have it here. So you can see this is kind of grayed out, low sales. This is not my main point of concern. We want to show it, okay, this happened. But the key thing is we launched a new marketing campaign, then sales increased. And you can see green color being used for that. And you're putting some numbers, okay, there was a 60% increase after doing marketing campaign. So that's the like presenting information as the underdog story, right? Something happened, made some changes, it went back, right? So don't use red color in this case or any other color. Green color works well, right? But again, please make sure you can see at the back, right? Okay. But usually in boardrooms, this works pretty fine, right? Because you have fewer peoples. Okay. The next is redemption, right? How specific factors can lead to a positive future outcome. Okay. So can you think of an example on redemption? So here's the underdog example. How specific factors can lead to future outcomes. Well, that's already happened. We are presenting what happened. So that's kind of key difference here. Oops, I'm showing you So how specific factors can lead to future outcome. So it's looking into future outcomes based on what happens based in the previous changes, right? So think about this example. You can present information in two ways. So we have sales data for 4 regions: north, east, south, and west, right? And in this case, the south region market has grown 45%. If captured, it offers 1.2 million revenue increase if captured, right? So we are kind of highlighting what was the key increase in market, right? So which market has led to most increase. Now somebody may say, okay, start a story. Okay, we had least increase in east, but that's not my concern. We are recommending, okay, capture this market. It's going to bring you more benefit, right? So we are kind of focusing only on those data points, right? Okay. So remember, need to know, good to know. So if somebody needs to know east, they can ask, right? But our main focus of story is, okay, let's leverage that and let's go for that market to increase the revenue further, right? Okay. Then we have threats. So highlighting the particular threat to the business, right? So in this case, we have an example here. So lack of qualified engineers and their impact on business. So we have along x-axis we have years and the number of hires which are happening. So up to year 3. So that's what we have. So at that particular point, we're just making a prediction. We're just adding a trend line to this data, right? Okay. So in this case, if current industry trends continue, there will be a lack of qualified engineers by year 3. And we won't be able to have a functional labor, right, to do the jobs. Okay. So I will disagree slightly how the information is presented. So basically, the standard way to present the future prediction is dotted line. So if it needs to be redrawn, this can go as a dotted line. So when you see a dotted line, you see it's the future prediction, right? Okay. And last but not least are the victory and tragedy, right? So positive outcome and a negative outcome. So usually for these, you may not need to add any visual. You're just kind of showing the numbers. So for example, positive outcome, we increase the compliance rate by 1.4%, which is 26% above target. So this is just a card, right? That's you added into a visual. Online registrations dropped, which are 63% below average. So again, that's the card, right? So in this case, I'm not interested in any trend or anything. It is just simply the outcome. Is it a positive outcome or a negative outcome, right? So usually we use multi-row cards or single-row cards to present this type of information. Okay. Any questions up to this point? So please keep this in mind. The 5 basic story building arcs, right? Okay. And you can see these kind of fits into a different situation, right? Okay. Questions, concerns, comments, stories? Okay. In threats? Future trend line. Yeah. Okay. Right. So again, some guidelines around presentation. So when you looked into today's classroom files, right? There was a file from Harvard Business Review, right? So you can use that as a standard too, because I kind of look into that sometimes to kind of find